you have like a gift. I've told you this before, but like I think different people have different gifts in conversations. Your gift, I feel like, is you can like disarm people really well. You ask questions in such a way that's so super sincere, but it's kind of where I'm like, wow, he just asked that. I don't think I could. Like, I don't know if you remember, but the first time I was the first time you met Lecrae, we were in Texas speaking at something together, and Lecrae's a big person. He's also he's a tall, bigger guy. And I remember him talking his story. We were backstage and you just met him, but he said something and you're like, hey, you kind of just passed on that and went to the next thing. But that's a big thing that you just shared. You're like, how did you process that? And like, how did you just, was that hard for you? And everyone's like, dang. And he kind of went back, but then he's like, no, it's a good question. And he shared. And I remember hearing David Platt on your podcast and him sharing the line that was so big for me was, he said, I'll be honest with you, Carey, because you got him there. And he was sharing about how like one of the most dry seasons spiritually maybe in his life was actually the year after writing Radical. And I'm sure there's just so many moments where you're like, wow, they like went there, they shared that. So when I wanted to learn from you, like, how do we like create great conversations? I just think you're amazing at doing that. Just want to give you your flowers is the language people use. But can you kind of talk to young leaders before we go into is like the importance of just being a great question asker or conversationalist, or just the importance of why is conversation really important right now and doing it well?
I think it's at risk. Great conversation is at risk. I've talked about this with people my age, people who are a little bit older than me. I think I've talked about this on the record with Gordon MacDonald, so I don't think I'm telling tales out of school. But he and I were talking about the art of conversation once, and he said sometimes he and his wife Gail can go out for an evening and nobody asked them a single question. And
wow.
I think what's interesting, you get around an OG like Gordon MacDonald and Gail, I hope you've got a question or two, but I think what social media, and I'm not against social media, I'm on it. I believe, this is where we are. This is our moment. To quote Kevin Kelly, it's inevitable, right? But what happens is we're so used to talking about ourselves on social media that, like, my status update is about me or what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or some brilliant insight, that I've lost interest in Grant. Yeah. I've lost interest in Cheyenne. I am more about getting me to flex in front of you than I am about a genuine curiosity about you. So I think when you said, I want to talk about this, I'm like, I want to talk about it too, because I think it's at risk.
Yeah. I think that in short terms, I would say the prosperity gospel that was like something to be really concerned about has actually been flipped for the next generation, which I would call a platform gospel. And so instead of using God as a stepping stone to maybe money, it's more to a platform. And that's harder to detect because you're doing it mostly for God, hopefully.
Mostly. That's very honest.
Mostly, but some for you. And I think some, it might be like, if I'm honest, I'm more starting to do this more and more for myself, but I got to wrap God's name around it. But there is a pressure to build a platform more than ever before. So I never thought about how you just said, it's almost like you've exercised the muscle more than ever before of showing self, presenting self.
Well, I think underneath a lot of platforms, including mine on my not very good days, is look at me, notice me. You're kind of the insecure kid, right? You're the one who back in elementary school wants to get noticed, wants to get picked for the team, and that's dangerous. We all have those moments, but I think it's more like, okay, what am I going to contribute? How am I going to help? What can I do that is going to be meaningful to other people, and how can I take an interest in you rather than just look at me.
Yeah. Before we go into the 7 kind of discoveries around great conversation, or kind of had a question of, do you think if I was able to ask your parents, or like early on when there's little Carey, and I said, hey, Carey, I've gotten to see the future, and Carey's like going to have a national/global like platform where he's helping leaders, and it's through the the method and the means of conversation, would they be shocked or like, okay, I could see that? Were there like signs of that at a young age for you?
I think we're all shocked at what happened. I think my parents are absolutely shocked and delighted at, how God has used my life. But there were clues. There were breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
Oldest, firstborn, one of 4 kids, 3 younger sisters. So I was always trying to get noticed. We had a loud house and, lots of chatter, lots of competition. So it was kind of like early flexes in our childhood to get noticed. And I mean, at 12, people were saying, you're a leader. Like, what's going on there? Yeah. And I didn't, I wasn't like in leadership development for young entrepreneurs or anything. It was just, if there was a hole, I intuitively stepped in to fix it. If nobody was saying anything, I would speak up. Lo and behold, I'm an Enneagram 8. But, at 16, I walked into the local radio station and said, how do you get a job here? And a week later, I was on the air. And what is that makes you want to do that? I don't know, but the answer is there were clues, and I was always struggling to be heard by more than just the people. So I was looking for a platform, I guess you could say, before there were platforms, when it was broadcasting, not social media. And I think about that more and more as I get older, because I'm like, what is that? I don't know, but it was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Even I know you have a lot of history in law too. So it is around good discussion.
And drawn to the courtroom. I only did a year. I did 3 years of study, bar admission course, which is brutal, and then a year in a law firm. But I gravitated toward the courtroom, and I'm like, give me more, give me more, give me more. And they threw me in court almost every day that I was at the firm, and I loved it. Yeah. It was a sport to me, probably a little bit unhealthily, but like I just loved arguing. I loved the debate.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us what would be the first discovery you had? And even if you could preface it with this, is about how many interviews do you know that you've done? And then if you to guesstimate how many hours then that is, like these you're in like the percentile when it comes to how much conversation you've done. But yeah, how much do you think you guesstimate that you've done? And then could you lead us into the first kind of discovery of here's something to the art of great conversation you've found?
I have 700 interviews in the can that we've aired. Probably some others I've done. I'd say I'm easily 800 plus interviews I've done in the last decade. Yeah. And so how many hours? I mean, just conversation there, that's easily 1,000 to 1,200 hours of conversation. And then you add the prep to that. So give me another decade and I could be at Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule.
Well, and are you counting at events too? Because of course you've done.
Yeah, at events I've done a lot. So it's probably, with events and conferences. Yeah, it's funny. I was on a call today. What am I doing? I'm hosting a webinar, a major national webinar, and I'm doing interviews. So it's probably, you could safely double that. Yeah. Yeah. So probably 1,600 interviews. So that's 2,000 hours, minimum probably 3,000 hours. And then I've got all my prep, which can range from an hour to a day, depending on the guest. So spent a lot of time thinking about conversations. Yeah.
So I asked you, can you share what are just some discoveries you've had along the way of what leads to great discussion? 5
episodes into my podcast, I put an imaginary sticky note on the lens of my camera that simply said, shut up. And what I realized is it's my job, and this is sort of the first idea I shared with you and with people watching this, is be interested, not interesting. Not a phrase that I came up with. I've heard it. But I think it's really good. I think we all want to be interesting. I think we all want people to notice us. And honestly, most of us who are in the habit, if you're having a conversation in public, you probably have something to say. You've got a noteworthy message. You built something. But my job as the interviewer is to be interested, not interesting. And I try to extrapolate that to all conversations. So, when we first met, you tell the story about me driving me to the airport, and I just asked you questions and you barely got one in. Yeah. Well, to me, that's success. Now, maybe it's a little more balanced in the future, But like if I'm just sitting there waiting to pontificate, I think I have a problem. And so are you generally interested in the other person? And I think that's true at parties. I think that's true at dinner. I think that's true over coffee at conversations. Even on first dates. It's been a long time since I had a date. I've been married for over 3 decades. But if it's all about look at me, look at me, look at me, there's some issues there. So be interested, not interesting, not trying to be the person.
Yeah. But you're like so good at it that even we were together again a couple weeks ago. We went to a coffee shop, and I remember one of the first things I said when I got back in the car was, I think I realized I think I talked way more than him. And I said, again, he's asking me so many questions, and we're talking, and I mean, you just definitely have a curiosity. I mean, he shared a story with you guys, but the first time I ever met you, we spoke at a leadership network event. I happened to have a flight going out around the same time. So you're like, hey, go ahead and ride with me. And I'm thinking, dang, I get to like ask you questions, which I'm constantly, I mean, I sincerely want to ask questions, but you did ask like 90% of the questions. So I was talking a lot, but that always stood out to me. And as we talked even recently, you stood out to me as a leader that is older than myself, but would easily be able to like just answer questions you wanted to know. And other than you, I've seen Craig Rochelle be that way, and Andy Wood be that way, who's now the senior pastor of Saddleback, for those that don't know Andy, where I'm around them and they're like, hey, I really want to ask you this. Okay, this. And by the time you look at your watch, you're like, we don't have any more time left. And all they did was ask you questions. And I'm like, man, but you guys are known for like great leadership. And I got to assume there's like this insatiable hunger of like, I have not arrived. I still want to grow.
Well, I definitely haven't. And I mean, I had seen you, we had hung out at a conference a few days earlier. The day before we had that coffee, if I got my timeline right, you had preached. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty intrigued by the way you did the message. Really loved your slides. Mm-hmm. And you showed me your slides and the artwork and that you designed it. And then you got into like this book you're working on.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fascinating. And so, I want to ask questions. Yeah. And I find the older you get, the more questions you should be asking. There seems to be a split in the road, maybe at 40 or 50. I'm definitely past those landmarks. But the split in the road is a lot of people kind of lose their curiosity. And they want to pontificate, they become cynical. And so I just decided I'm going to keep asking questions. So I think it's a natural disposition, but it's also like a cultivated habit.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I can learn so much if I'm just interested, and particularly from leaders who are younger than me or in a very different context, that I have a lot to learn. And, I'm taking notes, whether that's on a physical, piece of paper or whether that is in my head. I'm always taking notes.
Yeah. Last question on this point is, and you may not have a story, but have you ever found yourself, because you had curiosity, you actually learned from someone who you're like, I really don't know if I can or think I'll learn from them, but actually this is an amazing idea and it came because I brought a curious posture to this conversation?
Yeah, I gotta flip through the index cards in my head, but let me think about it. The answer is yes. I'm just trying to find a specific example. Okay, there was one. I won't name names.
Yeah.
But there was a guy who wanted to be back on my podcast for the second time. And I thought, I don't know. I kind of asked all the questions I had to ask. Mm-hmm. And he was, I kicked the can down the road. It's like, hey, let's connect again in a few months. We'll see. And it wasn't not a bad leader, but I'm like, I just don't know the angle. So he gave me a proposal, and I thought, oh, there could be something there. But like, is it going to be interesting to my listeners? And I did the interview, and I was blown away. I was like, whoa, there was so much value there. And it came as a real surprise to me. Mm-hmm. And all I had to do was ask a string of questions. And he over-delivered. And I think too easily, to your point, I can dismiss people. I'm like, I got nothing to learn. Yeah. I got a lot to learn. And I meet some really fascinating people, whether they're running a camera at an event. I'll give you another example. I had a video day yesterday, hired a crew here in Nashville, and had never met anybody on the team before. And it was a couple of 22-year-olds who did all the shooting all morning. And, during breaks, I was like, okay, so tell me about it. Well, they met in high school and they did this and they took it seriously a couple of years ago. And I'm like, great. Like my team set it all up. I had no idea who they were. And then we were shooting reels for Instagram at the end. They had reset the cameras. And I said, we got to get on TikTok. And I said, we have an account, but we're not doing anything. And they're like, well, you know what the secret to TikTok reels is? I'm like, no, I have no idea. And they're like, well, TikTok, instead of delivering 60 seconds, you need to say every sentence independently, and then we cut it all together. So I said, well, let's do a second take.
That's kind of true, yeah.
Yeah, and so, instead of saying, hey, Grant, it's really good to be on your podcast. Today we're going to talk about, I'm like, hey, Grant, it's really good to be on your podcast. Today we're going to talk about, and it's Carey here, and so I just did the whole thing over again. They're going to give us 2 cuts. And that was a learning for me and my team. And my team is a lot younger than me. So, yeah, those are like, who can you learn from? So many people.
Yeah. What's the second discovery in conversation?
Second discovery, forget about yourself. This is really hard, but it's egoless. And in an intriguing conversation, I think you have to be prepared just to lose yourself. So this is a rule for me in podcasting. I have other venues where I can make my views known. Now, if I got a buddy on the show and we're sort of going back and forth and debating a subject, that's going to be different. But if I'm interviewing Malcolm Gladwell or I'm interviewing Seth Godin or I'm interviewing Jim Collins or Jenny Allen or Rebecca Lyons, my job in that interview is to shut up and to be interested, not interesting, and forget about myself and not try to flex how much I know with every question. And, this is sort of tied to ego. Larry King, who's one of the greatest interviewers of the 20th and 21st century, he had a mantra, which would basically be the dumb one. Like he said, most people haven't read, so you have James Clear, who I've had the privilege of interviewing, Atomic Habits. The guy sold a bajillion books. Literally, last time I looked, I think it was 14, 15 million books. It's probably higher than that now. You think everybody knows Atomic Habits. And, Larry King was like, most people haven't read your book. So I'm just like, so tell me more about habits. Why habits? And so you want to let on that I did read your book and I'm respecting your time and I know who you are. It's not like, so what do you do for a living? You ever written any books? You don't want to be that guy. But you want to bring your audience in and not assume that they have a graduate degree in habits. So I don't mind being dumb. And sometimes my team's like, whoa, that guy really kind of ran all over you. I'm like, that's all right. But then I have other channels where I can write or I can publish books or I can do a YouTube, straight to camera where I am the teacher, but you got to know your role. And when you're around someone, particularly on a first meeting or somebody who, is an influencer or someone you really respect, it's like park your ego at the door and just kind of lose yourself.
Yeah. A lot of young leaders feel the pressure to build something right now and feel like this is the window to do it. And then when you're looking on social media, you're seeing, oh, my other friends are not only building it, their doors are opening for them. And so it's hard to feel that pressure of, I do got to get my thing known. And then you're saying, but forget about that in the conversation. It feels probably like when Jesus said, you got to lose your life to save your life. Can you give some advice to those who feel like, man, that's such a paradox?
Yeah, there is something there to the teachings of Jesus, I think. I mean, I'm known as somebody who looks into the future, church trends, basically church growth. That's sort of my wheelhouse. So I definitely have, if you can call it an expertise or at least an interest in that area, and that's what I'm known for. But I would say to young influencers, and I've talked about this with people my age and stage, the challenge with young influencers is most of the people above 40 or even 35 did something remarkable that gave them influence.
Yeah, I agree.
In other words, like Craig Rochelle, who we've already talked about. Like Craig wasn't setting out in 1996 to be an influencer. He's like, I wanna do great things for the kingdom. I wanna plant a church, and it was the struggle bus for the first year or two, and they went up and they went down, and it became something. And then they launched Church Online, but it was an experiment, and then they did YouVersion. And now he's the Craig Rochelle everybody adores, emulates, and for good reason. But Craig, and I've talked to Craig about this. Craig never set out to become an influencer. He set out to try to build a church. And in the process, he had influence. I didn't set out to be an influencer. I set out to try to help leaders. In the process, I got an audience. Yeah. And so I think the thing would be, it's not so much what you know, because there's a million experts, a lot of fake experts out there, right?
There's a lot of life coaches that are like in their 20s, which I just don't understand.
It's like, how about you live a decade? Or, as they say, when should you write your marriage book? Maybe you should get your first anniversary nailed down before you write your marriage book, right? So, I mean, there's all that going, but like do something significant. And then the influence often takes care of itself. Yeah. So whatever that is. And maybe that's a generational thing. Maybe that'll change in 10 years where it's just I've always been an influencer. But if your character doesn't develop faster than your platform, that's danger.
Yeah.
You look at all the child actors over the last 5-6 decades.
Good case, yeah.
It's a graveyard of just dashed hopes and dreams. Ends up in a lot of addiction. The other thing is you can get known for stuff that you don't want to be known for. Like, what if you become the cucumber guy on TikTok? You're ever cemented into 2024. Your life has become about cucumbers. Do you really want to be known for cucumbers for the rest of your life? Yeah. They gave you your viral fame for a month. You got your 15 minutes or your 15 seconds, but now what? And so what's a delight is if you're doing something like Craig has no problem waking up and coming up with new content because he's been doing this for 40 years. Right? I wake up and I get to be me because I talk about the things that are really interesting to me. And I don't feel like I have to release a video on cucumbers or, do something more outrageous every day to increase the views.
Yeah. I wonder, what are your thoughts on this? Is it possible that in a generation that maybe puts the cart before the horse of more feeling like I've got to build the platform before just building something local, and then people say this is amazing, make it more national or global. So it's like you're saying he just was building a church, then people were like show us on a national level. They're coming in to figure out how to do it. I've wondered why so many young people preach or lead, I think, with passion, but not so much with authority. And I think you can only do it with authority when it's like you've been in the secret place, you've been through the ringer, you've been whereas like no one believes in you but God, and then you see the journey, and it's often in the unseen moments that's where authority comes from. Could you speak into like I feel like you can always muster up passion, but authority has to come from true experience and time with God.
That's a great insight. I think that is where authority comes from. Just in my own life, why do I have authority in the church space? Well, I led a church for 20 years, and I started in obscurity, an hour north of Toronto, 3 dying mainline churches. Like there was nothing prestigious about the first assignment I took in ministry, which has gone on to become Connexus Church. And there were a lot of ups and there were a lot of downs. If you look at, I'm sort of known as somebody who can speak into burnout and productivity. What did that come out of? That came out of the worst year of my life when 19 years ago I burned out, and it was awful. It was awful. And the last thing on my mind is, in the summer of 2006, last thing on my mind is God is going to use this in spectacular ways. It's like on my mind was, God, are you still there? Like I feel dead. I don't know how I can do this anymore. Like it never even occurred to me that would become something that God used in the same way that, you see people who've been through tremendous suffering or tragedy. And I'm sure the last thing they're thinking of in that moment is, God, are you going to use it? But that is the gospel. The gospel, the symbol of the Christian church is the cross. So I'm not saying you have to suffer. I would actually take a suffering bypass for everybody I care about. It's like I would love to not suffer anymore, but it's probably going to happen. And it's in that crucible.
The crucible is a good word.
That the metal is formed. Yeah. It is in the crucible that you get refined. And that crucible can be, you built a channel and it fell apart and your best person left and stabbed you in the back, or someone stole money or something, but there's almost always a struggle there. And I always think of it this way. People admire your strengths, but they resonate with your weaknesses. It's like, cool for you, Grant. That's awesome. That's awesome. But when you say, hey, can I tell you about a season of my life that was really hard? People are like, oh, respect. And there is something to that. And I think on social, you can live in the shallows or you can live in the deep. And a lot of it is in the shallows.
Yeah.
A lot of it is, 60 seconds on or 30 seconds of and jump cuts and punch-ins and, graphics and B-roll and all that stuff. It's in the shallows. But if you can take people to the depths, they know. Like if I stood up and talked about burnout before I burned out, you know what I would have said? Would have said, sleep when you're dead, come on, you got to hustle, hustle, hustle. Long story short, now if you burned out or you know someone who's burned out and I speak on burnout, there's an immediate silence in the room because they know I know. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget that pain. Mm-hmm. And now, somebody asked me to talk on other subjects. I'm like, not my wheelhouse. I'll get up there and there won't be a resonance. Yeah.
Yeah. So your first one was be interested, not interesting. Mm-hmm. Sorry, be interested, not interesting. Second was kind of get out of the way.
Yeah, forget
it's not about you. And then what would you say is the third? An interesting
conversation. I would say follow the curiosity trail.
Yeah.
And this is what gets me hijacking the questions often is if you're really interested in another person, just get curious. Like, the 22-year-old video crew that was filming me yesterday, I could have just taken the break to say, all right, how much longer? What's the run sheet say? No. Hey, where's the sparkling water? Could have done that.
Yeah.
But I started, I knew their names and I wanted to get to know them. And all of a sudden I learned something about TikTok and I learned something about them and learned something about entrepreneurship. That was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, too, when you are curious like that, literally today I was thinking, that quote where people say, our God has cattle on 1,000 hills. Mm-hmm. This is the message translation. So don't be
it's
too
a little loose.
Yeah, a little loose. Yeah. But I've really thought maybe it's not technically, of course, that God literally owns these. Of course, it's not own cattle. Like that was like that was a way of maybe translating wealth. But that like when God wants to do something, he has people that can answer any problem, whether they need the finances, but also the wisdom. Like there's almost like a person for every problem. And so if you're willing to talk to these people, you might not even have to ask God, or you can ask him, but when he answers, he often answers through people.
Collaboration is so powerful. That was my note to my team today, because we really like Nashville. We love the area. And I've thought about spending a little bit more time here. And then I'm like, well, I'll have to build a studio and, that's expensive. And then I got to do this and all the logistics. But here we are sitting in a friend's studio recording a podcast. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, I was at Annie F. Downs' That Sound Fun studio.
Yeah.
And it was so easy. My team monitors the cost. I don't know exactly what it cost, but I can promise you it was a fraction of what it would cost for me to build it out for myself for a day. Yeah. And they had all the expertise. It was turnkey easy for me to do that. And I'm like, I got to collaborate more. Yeah. Yeah. So I think you're right. The answer is often in other people, and you can learn so much when you don't feel like you have to do it yourself. And my default is to be the lone wolf. And so I got to really resist that.
Why do you think people often want to be a lone wolf? Like, it doesn't sound good. Usually analogies in church are often like, the zebra that goes away, that's the one the lion wants to get. But people do it over and over again. What is the comfort in it, or the familiarity, I guess, possibly?
Yeah, I would trace that back to my childhood, being the only son. My dad worked a lot. He was an immigrant and, was working 12, 14-hour days, plus half a day Saturday. And, my sisters were into Barbie dolls and pink. And I'm like, no, not for me. And I think I learned to cut my teeth by myself. And that pattern follows you, I think, in life. And so I've learned to work with teams. I mean, the church grew to the point where there's no possible way you can do it by yourself, obviously. So we had, over a dozen staff, et cetera, et cetera. I have a small team that helps me do what I do now. So I feel like I'm in constant correction mode. And it goes with, when you look at, the big five, I'm not a psychology expert, but there are different dispositions or characteristics that describe human beings. And one of them is open or closed. So a person with a closed mindset, sort of like, this is the way it is, black and white, I'm on my own. An open person is like, not sure I agree, but tell me more, right? One of my goals, and I set this one at 50, was to become more and more open every year. And openness is curiosity. That doesn't mean I dilute my faith. It doesn't mean I deconstruct. If anything, it's led me to a more profound understanding of the faith that I have. But I think curiosity is part of that. And curiosity is doable. Like, and it's like, you have to be more humble. Well, how do you know you've arrived at humility, right? It's like, I'm the most humble person in the world. No, you failed that mission then. So for me, I want to become more curious, and being curious is just like, ask more questions. Go like, okay, why is the sky blue? Why do leaves turn in the fall? What happens to a tree? I read a book called The Hidden Life of Trees last summer. It was amazing. It was just great. Right now, I got curious in a totally obscure question about why in Polynesian culture, people were such good mariners in canoes. Like they could traverse the ocean in a canoe. These are like not 13-foot boats, but like 80-foot boats. I'm reading a book right now to satisfy a curiosity about something that will have zero functional utility in my life. But I think it's really fascinating to me. Like, what have we lost generationally in knowledge? Why do I need to have Google Maps on my phone when I'm out in my boat? And these people 800 years ago could traverse the Pacific Ocean in a canoe and know exactly where they were, navigate by the stars, the wind, and the waves. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Well, that's really fun. I don't know. I like learning.
Yeah. When it comes to the curiosity trail, like following that, there's got to be, like, if I'm talking to your wife, Tony, and she's with you, we're at an event, and you guys are like watching someone do an interview, and then another person do an interview, and another person do an interview. Because you do that all the time, there's no way you're not kind of even potentially judging it and just thinking. You can't help but think how I would do that. And if you work, I used to work with a roommate who was a construction worker, and every time we passed a construction site, he's like, "Who's doing that? Oh, they're not even that good." I'm like, I'm like, dude, I never think about a construction site. And when I got into videography, I started seeing like, this was back in college. I was like, oh, this is probably how they shot that, or this. And before I just saw commercials, and that was just a commercial. But for you see these interviews all the time. What are signs when someone's not following the curiosity trail? You're like, oh, you missed that. Because I know that's happening in an interview, but that happens in conversations every day.
So in prep, I'll take that through a couple of stages. In prep, it starts. You've all seen the interviews, and mainstream media does this really well, where they're not asking questions, they're making statements. Yeah. So, Grant, in your sermon yesterday, you said X, Y, Z. Yeah. Theologically, how is that true? That's not a question. That's an accusation, right? So they're not asking questions. Another thing is never ask a question that has just a yes or a no in an interview. So I try not to. Do you enjoy your current job? That's a yes or a no, right? I would say, what do you find most interesting about what you're doing now in your life? Well, that's open-ended. Yeah. And you could talk about that for half an hour. So I try to ask open-ended questions. The way that I do this, and this might be very idiosyncratic, is when I'm listening to someone else do an interview, and anybody can play along at home. So next time you're listening to me do an interview, or anybody, as the guest is answering the question, you will start developing questions of your own. It's kind of like, well, I went to Harvard, but then I dropped out in my second year, and I started a tech startup, and I went bankrupt. But then we started this. Well, there's like 5 questions that you could ask right there in that 10-second soundbite. Why did you drop out of Harvard? What was that like? Yeah. Wait, you went bankrupt. Why didn't you just go get a day job? Why did you start over again in the startup? Like, so I love it when I'm listening to another interview and I'm like, oh, I hope he's going to ask this. I hope she's going to ask this question. And then they ask it. Yeah. Then I'm like, that's cool. And when I listen back to my own shows, that's my criteria, because the guest will be talking. And listen, I'm doing dozens of interviews, filming them months in advance. So, I mean, I don't really remember what I said. I don't have a photographic memory. So if I'm listening back to a show after it airs that I did, an interview I did, the guest might drop something really interesting. I'd be like, oh, I hope I ask this question. I hope I ask this question. Then 2 minutes later, I ask the question. I'm like, good, that's a win.
Yeah.
So that to me is a curiosity trail, and it's really the question under the question.
Yeah.
So, I'll often ask somebody, well, what was that like? What did it feel like? Why did you move to this city?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose that model? Like, you almost have to be a 5-year-old, you've had young kids in your house.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of whys to the point where you're like, just be quiet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But ask a lot of whys. And often this is where you get the drop you talked about at the beginning. People don't go that deep. And so when you're talking to a Lecrae or you're talking to a Craig Rochelle, because we're picking on him in this conversation, most people just settle for the first answer and then they move on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask a why, and they're safe, you're not out to get them, you're not out to get a headline, they'll reflect on it, and that's where the gold comes out.
Yeah.
That's where they will often thank you for that, going, that's one of the most meaningful conversations I've had in a long time.
Yeah.
Because you made them reflect on their own experience. And who has time for that? Their heads are down. They're busy. Like they're making records. They're preaching sermons. They got staff meetings to go to. So if I can take an hour and a half of their day and make them reflect on things that are meaningful and helpful and that maybe can serve them in a small way moving forward, like how cool is that?
Yeah. And everyone wants to have like meaningful conversations. Is there like a bank of questions you have that feel like lead to meaningful conversations? Like I know they get used to getting asked these same questions all the time. Here's a couple questions I've just found really open up a great dialogue.
Ooh. Some people have stock questions all the time, and I've experimented with stock questions that I ask on a regular basis, and I keep changing them up. Like they'll be there for a season, and then they disappear. But I think about what not to ask. So when one of the ways you get a guest on a podcast is they're releasing a new book or a new product. The publisher or the publicist creates questions. Never, ever ask the publishers questions. Sorry, publishers, I love you. Don't ask those questions because they're dumb. It's like in chapter 1.
Yeah.
In chapter 1, Grant, you say this. In chapter 2 and chapter 3. First of all, nobody wants a book report because 99% of people haven't read the book. They don't even know the book exists. So what you want to do is you want to make and this is how I think I serve the guest. I want to make the conversation so interesting that when people go, wait, Grant has a book? Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I need to get the book. Did they talk? I don't know what the book's about, but he's a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
I want to have that conversation. Yeah. Another thing you can do is, and this is a principle, look for the emotion. So Horst Schultz, the first time, founder of the Ritz-Carlton, I interviewed him. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. I was pretty excited to have the founder of the Ritz-Carlton on my podcast. And he told me I was the last interview on a media day. So, a publisher will often line up 7-8 interviews. And by that time, I don't care wiped. Who you are, you're wiped. You're clinically brain dead. So I was the last one on a Friday afternoon. And I could tell, he said, I'm tired. We're going to do this. How long is it? And I'm like, great. We'll make the best of it. And I was getting answers that I recognized from the book, which is totally understandable. And I thought, how do I crack the code on this? So I thought about it and I said, Horst, it's been a few years since you sold the Ritz-Carlton. I imagine you still go to restaurants and hotels. When you're out with your wife at a personal dinner, is there ever anything that drives you crazy? So there it is. Open-ended question. Just like this guy is fanatical about hospitality.
And their culture is insane.
And the culture is insane. Mm-hmm. So when he goes to a restaurant, to your point, the guy walks by a construction site. He's like, oh, that's what he's doing. Horst sees it totally differently. Yeah. So I ask him, is there anything that ever drives you crazy? He's like, oh, all of a sudden I could tell by his whole posture shifted, his body shifted. He goes, my wife doesn't even want to go to dinner with me sometimes. and then I had him. And so emotion, like getting them off script, and the better known the guest is and the more interviews they do, the harder it is to go off script. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But some of them, when I interviewed James Clear, I want to know about the making of Atomic Habits. Mm-hmm. And I hope to have him on again for round 2. But he said to me, he was very generous with his time, gave me a full hour, which you don't often get with people who sell that many books. Mm-hmm. He just said, that was so refreshing. Mm-hmm. Everybody just asked me about the book. You asked me about the making of the book and who I am and all that stuff. So it's like that is a win for me. because people love it. Like, think about it. When people really want to know you, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Like, when people really want to know about me, I'm kind of like, oh, that felt really good.
Yeah.
And you know where this goes back to? A lot of it goes back to the old book, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
The classic, yeah.
Do you have time for one more story?
Go ahead.
Okay,
yeah.
so there's a story in the book that...
This is like my book. This
is your book.
Like, was... There's the first book I ever read where I was like, wow, it's not a Christian book, but man, this book like makes sense. I'm curious what story you're going to tell.
So I might get the details wrong. It's been a couple of years, but there was a salesperson in the 1920s, 30s, whenever it was written, always trying to get his foot in the door. And this is like the era of door-to-door sales.
Yeah.
And he kept getting rejected. Every few months, the secretary would just say, no, Mr. So-and-so doesn't have time. He played the trick of like sitting in the waiting room, hoping to get a break on a bathroom break or something. Shut down. So finally he gets a break, and it's like the CEO, Mr. So-and-so, has 3 minutes. So you're thinking, I better be well rehearsed. He just walked in the door, looked around the office, and he said, I'm not going to make a sales pitch. He just goes, Mr. So-and-so, I see that fish on the wall. Do you like fishing? He's like, do I love fishing? Can I tell you the story about that fish and blah, 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 blah. An hour goes by. They're talking about fishing. He's like, my family hates my fishing stories.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear them. This was awesome. Hey, what do you sell again? Oh, yeah, I sell, legal pads. Great, I'll take 1,000 of them. Excellent.
Yeah.
Done. What did he do? He wasn't selling a thing. He was just genuinely interested in the other person. And I think there's something, because it works on me, if you ask me a lot of questions. And I, on the thing about follow the curiosity trail, the number of leaders who ask for a spot on my calendar, and I can't always give it. But when I do, I have met leaders for lunch. I have given them phone calls. And what always disappoints me is the leaders who spend 15 minutes giving me their entire biography on a 20-minute call. Yeah. It's like, this is what I did, and this is what I did, and this is my contacts, and this is our church, and this is... And I'm like, do you have a question? And I'm polite. Yeah. But like, to me, it would be like, hey, really grateful to get the time. I have a few questions. I'm taking notes. What do you do about? Like that I love. But you got to get over yourself. You got to follow the curiosity trail.
Yeah. I love the phrase that stuck with me. You told me that phrase a year ago, just in conversation, and that line just has always stuck with me since you shared it. Then I love the follow the emotion, like the fish story. It's like, okay, it opens people up. I actually tell young people, he's like, I'm going to train you in how to trick older people into discipling you. And I tell them, find out what they like to do for fun and then act like you want to do that as well.
100%.
So if it was you,
I love fly fishing.
If I was around you, I'd be like, all right, I live in Canada. Carey lives nearby. He's super, super busy, because the great leaders we want to get poured into, they don't have a lot of time. And so it's like, find what they are going to do, because it's something they love. I'd be like, Carey, we've been connecting a little bit. I know you're busy, but I'm actually trying to learn how to get my yard like great. I want that yard to look good. Can you show? I know you do a little bit.
I'm going to buy fertilizer.
Yeah, it's like, what should I get?
I'll show you exactly the blend that you need.
Because we like to convert people to like the things we like. Or it seems like cooking meat. On the green egg.
It's like, come on, we'll do a brisket.
Yeah,
come on over. I'll show you tri-tip. No, that's a brilliant strategy. And you're right. It's doing with rather than can you make another hour in your calendar for me? Yeah.
So lead us into the next one. I know it actually is kind of good. I think you mentioned the person that just kept talking and talking and talking. Yeah. So what's the next one of creating great conversation?
So it's just a marker that I use when I'm at a meal with someone, but use the meal test to test how much you talk. So what happens is, all things being equal, you and I sit down for dinner, and an hour later, if I've done a good job, I'm finished everything, and you are still on your first few bites of your steak. Not that I want you to have it cold, but the bottom line is, if you can't talk and eat at the same time. So if I ask you a question or make a comment and you reply, you can't eat. So what I want to do, what I notice is that if I'm talking all the time, I'm the one with a plate full of food after half an hour or an hour, and everybody else around the table is done. And so what I try to do is I just look at the state of the meal to see whether I have over-talked or overshared. Because I'm a leader. All leaders struggle with HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion in the room. That's what they call it, something like that. And I'm used to assuming that everybody's desperately interested in me, and they're not. And so if I'm curious, I'm eating well while other guests are like, oh, I better get to my steak.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good sign of you look down and you're like, okay, I got to
shut up or I got to let some other people talk. I imagine there's got to be an app that measures who talks when in the room, or you can train your ChatGPT to do that.
Yeah.
But like, it would be very interested, because Les McEwen, who I've had on the podcast a few times, he says the sign of a very healthy, diversified organization is at a board meeting, the CEO is the person who talks the least. In a really strong, resilient company. And you would think, no, the CEO is the vision caster, and I'm telling you to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to do that. You know, just the opposite.
Yeah.
Like, CEO is the person, Grant, you report in, Cheyenne, you report in, Tony, you report in. Great. Okay, we're done. It didn't have to add much.
I mean, you have such a sincere curiosity. It's not, because I'm sure at first you have to almost stretch the muscle of, okay, I have been talking a lot. Now I'm going to start asking questions. Then you're like, wow, this works and it's better. I'm learning. But for you, then the more you go down that path of curiosity and question asking, I'm curious for you. Who are you looking at, whether you interviewed them or you just watched them on TV? You mentioned Larry King Live. Like, what are the attributes of your favorite interviewers? Like, what stands out to you about them? In the same way I saw how you kind of disarm people, you almost have like a counseling trustworthiness. I'm curious, like, what do you elevate as like, man, that's a gift when you can do that?
I love it when I have interviewed a guest and someone on another podcast interviews the same guest, and we get totally different interviews. That Craig Rochelle does that really well. We'll text about it. It's like, oh man, your conversation with another person I really admire and kind of modeled some of what I do after is Tim Ferriss, not in the Christian space. He is relentlessly curious. He does super long form interviews, 2.5, 3 hours sometimes, and very eclectic tastes and continually disrupting himself. Find that very, very interesting.
What does that mean to disrupt yourself?
Well, he's always reinventing, like, who am I going to have on the show? How long are these episodes going to be? Can I try different formats? He introduced a walk and talk because he wasn't getting enough steps in. So he bought this headset where he could actually talk to people and record a podcast while he's out for a walk.
So they're not even walking with them.
No. He's like got his headset on.
Okay.
So yeah, it's really interesting things like that. And it's permission to do that. Cal Newport, I find a really interesting thinker too. So I'll dial into what he is doing, and he's really into long form. I think, believe it or not, as our attention spans get shorter and shorter, and that will impact relationally. Think about this, and tell me if this is a generational thing, because it really bothers me. But when you're out for dinner here in Franklin, you see a couple and they spend half of their meal on their phone together. Is that cool?
No, I think everyone knows that that's a fail.
That is fatal.
Yeah.
Okay, so even for you, it's fatal. For me, it's fatal.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot. I see that a lot. Like, if you're out with Cheyenne, hopefully you haven't lost interest in her after 5 years, right? I've been with Tony 36 years, married for 34. We've known each other. I have not lost interest in that woman. And we're going for dinner tonight. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but Tony says life is relationships. She's right. And I think relationships are conversations. And if you really want to look at what makes a great life, it is relationships that are conversations and experiences. So it's a conversation we have while we're figuring out tri-tip and we burn it by mistake. Or it's a conversation we have when we go kayaking one day. Or it's the conversation we have when we're at a conference backstage in a green room. John Ortberg says intimacy is shared experiences. I think he's right. Look at Jesus and the 3 years with the disciples. And, life is conversations. So hopefully at year 30, I do have some things I want to talk to Tony about tonight. Your conversations with Cheyenne are so much more rich than they even are now.
Yeah, it's good. That's, as they say, goals. I'm sure there's maybe even a pressure too of like, because you do this so well at work, it's like, okay, I've got to bring my first fruits to marriage.
Oh, listen, and I don't always get it right. So yesterday I shot video and did 2 90-minute podcasts back to back to back to back to back, and then drove through Nashville traffic back to Franklin. And Tony and I went out for dinner, and she started asking me questions. We're sitting just at a barbecue joint. I just looked at her, and I'm like, I can't answer anything tonight. Please don't ask me questions. Like, I was fried.
Yeah.
But today's a new day.
Yeah.
And like, we watched a TV show when we got home, played a game, and I'm like, talk to me. Just don't ask me questions. I got nothing left.
Yeah.
And that happens. But, we're in a long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
Today's a new day.
Okay, so you've shared a lot of different ones. Let's go into 5, 6, and 7. I know what's the 5th one?
Put yourself in their shoes. And this is a key, particularly when you're with someone who, you might be a bit intimidated by. You end up at a conference and suddenly you're talking to one of the speakers or someone you followed online for a long time and they answer your DM, that kind of thing. It can be very tempting to think, oh, now that I've got them, I'm going to monopolize their time, or I finally get to ask my question, or to assume that they live a perfect life. Well, the reality is after shooting 8 hours of video, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I'm human, or I didn't sleep well the night before. So when you're connecting with people, put yourself in their shoes, have some empathy for them. Ask yourself, like, okay, how do I make this easy for them to say yes to? Don't just make assumptions that they're robots or they're perfect. And as I said before, people identify with your strengths, they resonate with your weaknesses. So when you think about it, just think, for example, if I book a first meeting with someone that I really admire but don't know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got this, I will give them 5 minutes of the allotted time back as a general rule. It's like, if you give me 15 minutes, I'll let you go at 12 minutes. Because if I try to squeeze that last 2 minutes out and then it goes 17 minutes, you're going to be like, Carey doesn't respect boundaries. Or, I've had that the first time I interviewed Seth Godin. He doesn't give hour blocks of time. And so I said, how much time do we have on the clock? He told me. And then I said, okay, I got one more question for you. And toward the end, he goes, I got more time. Let them make that initiative. Don't do it yourself. And just assume a really good meeting is shorter and better than they thought it would be. Yeah. Things like that. Because what have they got? They got 10,000 other things that they put on hold to be with you. Yeah. And then, if they just got off after an hour epic sermon at some event, they might be tired and fried too. Yeah. So if you get a couple minutes with them, say, hey, this may not be the best time for this kind of question. Or just ask them, like, do you have the energy to ask if I can ask you a serious question? Chris Voss says, when you call somebody, and I still like calling people, I just ask him. I called somebody last night, a friend of mine. I'm like, is this a bad time? Don't ask him if it's a good time. Because then what are you going to say? Is this a good time? Well, not really, because we're getting dinner on or whatever. Is this a bad time? Puts them in control. Yeah. And then they're kind of like, I can't remember the last time I got no, it's a bad time. Most of the time they're like, no, it's not a bad time at all. Go ahead. Well, then you have permission to talk. Or it's like, it's not a great time. I got 5 minutes. Can you do it in 5? Yeah, excellent. Or can I call you back later? Yeah. Right? So you want to give them control.
The stuff you're sharing right now is really helpful, especially for young leaders that meet kind of older people they look up to, people they want to learn from. Sometimes it's not easy to put yourself in their shoes because you don't realize this, and you might think not that they're superhuman, but that kind of idea.
Well, it could be the manager of a hardware store or a small boutique in town. Like everybody's got their own story, or a parent with 4 kids at home. Like everyone's jammed. Yeah. So you want to be respectful.
Yeah. This is random, but it's something that young people often ask of other people and maybe don't put themselves in their shoes. And I'm sure you've gotten asked this question so many times. I'm curious what your thoughts on the question, can I pick your brain?
Yeah.
Do you like that? Is there a better way to do that? What do you think about the question, can you pick your brain?
Yeah. So that's not my favorite question. Okay. What I would say, I mean, if you, because I know you and we've got some years of history, are like, can I pick your brain on something? It's probably a yes. Right. I just have to find the slot. But assume, when you're dealing with a leader who gets hundreds or thousands of emails a week, that would be us, hundreds. There are lots of requests that never make it to me. And the reason they never make it to me is my team's job is to say no on my behalf.
Yeah.
So a more compelling thing, one got through to me today. The guy, I forget his name, wrote a compelling email that caught my assistant's attention.
Wow.
And it was to see if he could pick my brain, but there was a very specific subject. And it was on psychology. Well, that's not my thing. And I'm like, probably not going to be able to help him. But I had Katie respond back with 3 organizations that probably could. So what I would say is when it comes to picking your brain, be very specific about what you want. Lead with it. Don't give me 7 paragraphs of background on a text or an email. It's probably going to be an email because you don't have that person's phone number.
Yeah.
Right? Don't give me 7 paragraphs. I was born at a very young age, blah, 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 right? You don't want that. You want to be like, hey, I'm writing to you today. I've followed your work for many, many years, and I have a question about X. And I believe you're uniquely positioned to answer it. Here's why I would love, and this is what I will do with the time, and this is the follow-up I would make with it, right? So you want to give a promise that you're not going to waste some time. Another thing you could do is, and I do this, when I'm cold calling, like my cold call to Jim Collins to see if he would come on my podcast, look at who endorses his books, look at who his friends and neighbors are, and then see if you know anybody that they know.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, because it's like I knew a couple of people who knew Jim Collins.
Yeah.
And so what they're looking for common ground because they don't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh, if so-and-so knows you, then that's cool.
Yeah.
And they will probably ask, they'll shoot a text to so-and-so and just say, hey, do you know Grant Skeldon? Oh, yeah, he's a good dude, man. You should make some time for him.
Yeah.
So you want to do that, but not in a way that's presumptuous. And I always end with a, hey, if this doesn't work out, no problem at all. Continue to be grateful for your work. We'll continue to read, listen, watch for years to come. Gratefully, Carey. Gratitude gets you so far.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Kind of get to like borrow the trust of those who you've invested in and trust you. What's another thing you can do? Well, if you kind of get the privilege to be with a great leader and you want to have a great conversation.
Seek to add value, not extract it. So ask the question, what can you do for that person? So I have heard stories of people who approach someone with a cold call and like, I can do research on this for you. You know, here's an example of the research. Somebody looks at that. It's like, you're willing to do that for free? That's pretty amazing. I haven't got that email yet, but if somebody wants to send it, I'm open.
Yes.
You know, usually what happens in a cold call, if you're trying to get together with someone from the hardware store or a favorite preacher or a leader that you have influence with, is I want to extract value from them. Rare is the person who says, and sure, you're 23, you can't, you know, you haven't sailed the world 7 times. What do I really bring?
Yeah.
What do I really bring? Well, what you might bring is a perspective. So, for example, let's say you're an influencer, or let's say you're starting a digital agency that manages social media accounts. We get hit up like that every day, multiple times a day. And we have an agency. It's great. But rather than hitting me up and saying, you know, hey, we noticed your social, you're making a few key mistakes here. Do this discovery call with me and I can fix those mistakes. You know, YouTube's public. Take down one of my videos, re-edit it, make a 3-minute clip, send it to my team saying, hey, we'd love to work together. Really admire your work. I think I can get some improvements that can really improve your reach. We re-edited a recent podcast episode or reel you did for free. Here it is. Take a look. If you think this is of interest to you, I'd love to have another conversation. See how that's different?
Yeah, it requires a little bit of audacity in some sense.
And when I'm making cold calls to people, I will tell them exactly what works I read, what videos I watched, why I appreciate them.
Yeah.
Friends that I know who know them. Because this is the other thing, too. Everybody at that level all the hardware store owners talk to the other hardware store owners. All the mega church pastors talk to all the other mega church pastors within circles. I got a call from someone once who I knew who she was. She didn't know who I was. And I'm like, how did you even get my number? Like, how did you, like, not how did you get my number?
Yeah.
It was clear her publicist did. But I'm like, why would you even approach me? And she says, well, I was talking to Adam Grant and Seth Godin and Daniel Pink, and they all recommended you. Like, they all talk? They all talk. It's crazy. So just assume that if you're a cold call on someone, that they're checking with their friends, and then you want to add value. And if you're somebody who extracts value or always looking to see what you could get, or they can smell your ambition a mile away or your neediness, it's probably going to be, if you get in, it'll be a one-time 15 minutes or hour, and there won't be a follow-up.
Yeah.
But if you follow these rules and you're curious and you're kind and you're respectful, and you can add a little bit of value, and it might just be, that you say, they ask you a question and you're like, well, here's what I know about Gen Z and what I know about millennials. And you're talking to a 50-year-old. That would be value, or here's what I'm worried about with my generation. Like 60-year-olds don't have that kind of insight that comes directly from you.
Yeah.
So that's a way you add a little bit of value.
Yeah.
Or have you thought about getting onto social? Because my generation is less readers, more watchers.
Yeah. I like the kind of, again, you got to be a little bit of audacious faith. I mean, it's good. It makes great stories. A lot of like these great stories of this person getting slingshot to a unique moment is like you were saying, not just saying what you would do it and show it to me. I'm curious for you, I recommend this to a lot of young people in colleges. I was like, do not go to college and just get a job in college and then try to figure out what you're going to do after college. Like, go and work with someone who's doing what you want to do. Or if you can't even afford college, that's fine. Go and find whoever's doing what you want to do and figure out how to help them for free. Like, I even think that might be more helpful than college.
It is. And what I hear underneath that, Grant, tell me if I got it wrong, is what I hear is hunger rather than entitlement. And back to the beginning of our conversation, I think if you are building a platform at a very young age, there can almost be an entitlement. Like, why isn't this happening sooner?
Yeah.
Why aren't you seeing the value in me? And I think every generation has struggled with that a little bit in their teens and 20s. But that kind of hunger, that kind of humility, Brad Lomenick's story is he went and worked at a ranch, and his first job was to shovel manure. It included that on his task list. And he's like, I shoveled manure better than anyone ever shoveled manure in the history of manure. And that got him noticed. And soon he was running the ranch, right? Yeah. So I think you need that kind of hustle. Yeah.
Some of the best leaders I've ever met, no matter what age, they were all in no matter what season they were in. And they like soaked it for everything it has.
Yeah. Like if you're cleaning toilets, and I've cleaned toilets for a living when I was a teenager, make sure those toilets are clean. If you're sweeping the floor, sweep it well, man. There's nothing left in the corners. Not just like, oh, good enough. I don't think anyone will notice. I think that's a work ethic. Hustle gets you noticed, particularly by people who have done something with their lives.
Yeah. Okay. This is when we were going to do this podcast episode, this is the one thing I was like, I want to see what's going to happen. Or if you remember this do you remember the first time you ever met me? And what event was it?
Was it at the Q Idea, or was at Leadership Network?
Yes, good.
Yeah, okay. Leadership Network, Buckhead Church, Atlanta. Yeah,
so that's not the first time you met me. So, which I've always been glad. So I'm going to, for the sake of a learning lesson.
Did we have a phone call before
that?
No,
we never talked on the phone.
Because I was on your board.
Yeah, I met. Oh, yeah, you're on my advisory board.
I was on your board.
Oh, you know what? Actually, so we met briefly actually at a Orange conference. Horst Schultz was at that event, and Brad Lomenick briefly introduced us. And I think Brad was like that middle person who was like, "Hey, Grant, good guy. You should 100%. Talk." But before even that, you were at a Dallas event. It was like an executive pastors conference, and 4 executive pastors. And I had just written my first book. I was probably 26, 27 years old. And I don't know why. It was like, it's legit one of my top 5 like cringe moments with a leader of, because I at the time had a rule of like, don't go and talk to someone influential unless someone introduces you. And I actually don't think everyone needs to go by that. But for me, I'm in rooms with a lot of leaders, and at least for me, I've felt it just like has gone poor. That's not bad. It's just weird. Like, but if someone introduced me, I'm like, so sometimes people are like, have you met this person or this person? I'm like, I've been in the room with that person like 10 times. I've never met him because I never had a sincere reason to talk to him. If someone introduced me, I talked to him. But I broke that rule with you, and I went to go talk to you at this conference. And I don't know. I think, again, because I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but you were standing next to me for probably 5 minutes, I think, waiting for like the Uber to leave. I went up to you finally. I was like, he's here. I'm just going to go talk to him. No plan. Just talk to you. No, you weren't. You were great. But I was totally like went into like pitching my bio. Like trying to prove why I know I'm a young guy, but this and that, I'll get to do this. And I just wrote a book and I'm giving you my book. And I remember you're like, I'll read it with like it'll be my pleasure to read it. You were kind, actually. You were super kind. Good. But Good. I just felt like that was so awful. Like, why did you go up to him?
Well, even as you tell the story, I don't remember it. So the Lord has deleted that from
my memory bank. Yes, and I've always thought that happened.
Can I tell you, though, what's going through my head when I'm doing an event? And I can't speak for other leaders, but it is, to this day, overwhelming. Mm-hmm. To have the number of people who follow you, who even follow me, and lots of people have way bigger platforms than I do. And I am so grateful. Like when I run into listeners and, YouTubers and that kind of stuff, and people who read my emails and my books, it's still awesome and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And what a leader like that is doing, particularly, I like to get out of the green room and into the lobby and meet people, is it's like popcorn. It's like pop, had a conversation, whoop, oh, someone else, whoop, someone else, oh, someone else. Some people have photographic memories, I don't. And so, like, I could meet you at breakfast briefly in the hotel, and you can see me at 10 a.m., be like, hey, Carey, we're old buddies now. And I'm like, I don't remember. Yeah. What I remember, what was different about Buckhead is we spent some time together, and that imprinted in my memory. So often, when you're dealing with someone who's got some kind of followership or platform, they're doing their best to keep up relationally. And I don't believe God designed us to have 1,000 friends. Yeah. I believe he designed us to have a handful and then dozens and maybe a few hundred people that we know well. And we live in a different age. And so it's really when I get to know somebody. And for me to understand that, like even when I've had an hour and a half interview with people, like I ran into James Clear. I interviewed him because we already mentioned him. I ran into him backstage at an event. He knew who I was. Yeah. I did not anticipate because he's done 1,000 interviews. Yeah. I'm not assuming he knows who I am. I'm some bug on the church windshield that got squished. Like I'm not anybody to him. And so the fact that he remembered who I was really endearing to me. Yeah. But I don't assume that. Yeah. And so I think I lived for my first decade, I just had my head down doing leadership, and then other leaders started to show up. And so I think I spent enough time there that I still assume most people don't know who I am and most people don't care. And that's great. But that's what's happening in a leader's head at an event when they're meeting dozens or hundreds of people in a day.
If you could tell us quickly, then what are the meaningful things that you like help? Like what actually fuels you instead of it feels like popcorn?
When I hear someone's story, and the hard part is often I've got someone pulling on my arm going, you're due over here now. Yeah. So I don't get enough time, but I'm very interested. Like I had dinner for 3 hours with someone who just asked me, is there any chance we get a 15-minute coffee? And I'm like, well, what are you doing tomorrow night? My wife's out of town. I got to eat. You want to come for dinner? Turned out to be a 3-hour dinner. He was shocked. I mean, that happened once this year, but he was right place, right time. Yeah. I know all about him because I spent 3 hours with him, and if he walked in the room, we just pick up where we left off. But those are rare. Yeah. And I was really intrigued by his story. Yeah. And it was sort of a do for one what you wish you could do for everyone kind of thing. So it's really when I engage and I hear people's stories at some depths.
Yeah, kind of see a little bit of that transformation or a glimpse.
Yeah. The other thing about handing a leader a book, I've done that too. What I realized, sometimes that carry-on is packed so tight and they got a gift pack. There's actually no room for that book in the carry-on. So it's probably better to ship it to the author's address, whatever is their public address, and then just write a note in it like, it was so good to meet you at XYZ event. I really appreciated the time you took to meet with me. I'm sincerely grateful for all you do, Grant, or Carey. Yeah. And I've learned to do that now rather than, here, take my book. Yeah. But when you write a first book, you get excited.
I was definitely ahead of God's timeline on that one. But I think that's good advice for when it's like, oh, no, you were put in this room for a reason.
Honestly, it's practical. Their carry-on is full.
Yeah. Okay, close us out with the last two, even if you maybe share both of them. And then, what are the other things that we can do? That
I think we did. It's just one more.
Oh, sorry.
Don't use your relationship to flex. And I wrote that one down because, again, we all talk. So there was someone who said, hey, I'm really good friends with X megachurch pastor. Why don't you do this event with me? Kind of like, okay, I saw that on social too. So we all know each other. I texted X megachurch pastor and said, do you know so-and-so? He's like, well, yeah, kind of spent 5 minutes with him in a green room, and he wanted to snap a picture and post it on social, but I don't really know him. I'm like, got it. Sorry, can't do the event. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And I met with some leaders over the course of my time in Nashville. I have woefully inadequate pictures. And with the leaders that I really respect and really admire, I'll often not grab a picture with them. Or, if it's clearly a quick meeting and a photo op, we'll do that. But you want to be really careful with that. You want to be careful about bragging about who you met or pretending that you know somebody better than you actually know them, because that word gets around. And when that happens, I like to test a relationship first. I met with a podcast guest who's not part of the church bubble. And I've told a couple of friends, hey, I had, coffee with so-and-so, but I didn't take a picture. I didn't post about it. I didn't do anything cryptic because I care about the relationship more than I care about what I get out of the relationship. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. This is probably my most personal question that I would want to learn from, but I think anyone could learn from because we all have levels of the ability to name drop. But you have a lot of access to also name drop, of course, because it's not just that you could name drop because you get access to talk to so many people. It's hard when you legit learn great things that come up in conversation. You're like, hey, Calendar Report said this, or that just made me, Craig Rochelle said this, and it changed my paradigm on this. So you could not name them and then just take it, I guess. But do you have any type of like framework or code you try to develop of like, how do I, because I'm falling into that now where I'm like,
working on
you've said things to me that I'm like, oh, follow the curiosity trail. That's influenced me. But if I say you and then the next person is, Matt Chandler said this or whatever, then it's like, oh, always name dropping.
Well, I spent a little bit of time with Tim Keller, but I've read a lot of Tim Keller and I quote him prolifically.
Yeah.
Keller quoted, his joke was, and this is public, nothing he told me, it was, on a good week, I prepare my sermons. On a week where I don't have time, I just quote C.S. Lewis. He was, and Lewis died long before Tim was preaching.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I think it's fine to give other people, like I'll quote Craig or Andy or someone like that quite liberally because I don't want to steal their ideas as mine. I have to work on name dropping too because I think it's probably a weakness of mine. And if I drop a name, like I dropped a bunch of names in this interview, probably would be healthy for me to think, did they really need to know who it was or did they not? On the other hand, if I'm so cryptic about it, well, I met a leader once or this leader or that leader or leader X, it's sort of like that source in the paper. It's like unnamed sources in the White House revealed that. Well, then it's a meaningless conversation. So it's a tension to be managed, not a problem to be solved, to quote Andy Stanley. And what I try to do is I try to share the things that they've shared publicly, I will share publicly. The things that they have shared privately with me, I will keep private. So that's why when I was thinking about Gordon MacDonald, I'm like, did he say that in the episode? Yes, I think he did. Or, I will not share something about Craig that he hasn't talked about publicly on his channels or on my channels. Because my goal, and one of the reasons, I'll tell you about it after we're done filming, who I had coffee with on Friday. I care more about that person as a person and as someone who might be open to the Christian faith than I do about name dropping that person, even though that person is like going viral right now. It's just one of those things. Discretion is a better part of valor, and I can brag like anybody. Like I guess that one of the questions is, are those really your friends or are you bragging? And I don't always land on the right part of that. But on the and you know, I heard a definition of love a long time ago that I think is really I almost wrote that down as one of my points. Is love is when someone's name is safe in your mouth.
That's good.
You know, is my wife Tony's name safe in my mouth? Or am I going to diss her behind the scenes? You know, if you really love someone, their name is safe in your mouth.
Yeah.
And so
you would even protect it.
I would protect it. And so I want to talk about Seth Godin in such a way that if Seth was to walk into the studio, he'd be like, totally cool conversation, man. Not like, ooh. You know, as soon as if they are hearing the conversation, and I always say to people, not always, but you know, there's some guests you have on who are just really grateful to be on, and then other guests who have a lot to lose if something goes wrong on the podcast.
That's true, yeah.
And I always say, you have editing rights. If something comes out wrong, I'm not the guy who wants to get you canceled. Let me know. We'll cut it out. And once in a while, I have to cut stuff out. That's fine. That's their call. But I always want to put them at ease that nothing that happens on my show, nothing that happens on my time is going to compromise them in any way. And so I want to make sure that in our conversation, it feels like their reputation, their name is safe in my mouth. So that when I'm talking about them, it's like an appropriate conversation.
Yeah. And thank you for joining in. I know
this has been fun.
The thing that sticks out about you, of course, is like the whole add value curiosity. It's really, I mean, not letting this become so professional. It's like, hey, this is a relationship. These are people made in the image of God. Like you, whatever age, whatever stage, whatever like significance they may have in the world, you've done that super, super well. And
we're all people. You know, there's no hierarchy. When I was a pastor, you know, people are like, oh, would you pray for me? I'm like, hey, I don't have a direct line. Okay, I will pray for you, but my line is the same as yours. And what you realize about all the leaders that all of us admire is they're all just people. People with real hopes, real fears, real insecurities, real dreams. And I have the privilege of traveling and knowing some of the people who are making a real impact. The other thing I would say, you know, as we wrap up, is a nice thing you said, you know, you're so nice, you're so personal. The thing I'm so grateful about is, you know, my platform got built in my 40s and 50s, not in my 20s and 30s. So I had a little bit of maturity that helped. But the good news for me about what I'm doing publicly, it is a direct extension of what I'm doing privately. So I wake up every day and I don't feel like I have to put on armor or costume. I mean, the armor of God, but you know what I mean? I don't have to put a costume on and be somebody I'm not. That 700 interviews into my podcast, I want to get better, but I can just show up as myself. When I'm a guest on your show, I can just show up as myself. When I'm writing, I can show up as myself. When I'm speaking, I can show up as myself. There's no stretch. There's no gap. And the good news is that means I don't have to worry about, oh, well, did I say this right or did I say that wrong? It's like, no, get to be myself again tomorrow. Hopefully that adds values to others. Hopefully, and it makes me, I think, a better person because then I have to live out my values. But, you know, it's when you become the cucumber guy on TikTok or whatever made you viral now is what you have to be for the rest of your life. If there's a gap that opens up between who you are in public and who you are in private, that is an implosion waiting to happen.
Any final takeaway, especially anything that could be encouraging to them as young leaders trying to figure out conversations, like healthy relationships, meaningful relationships with depth, any type of encouragement you'd give them?
Play the long game. Life is short, but life is actually long. And we live in an era where I think everybody thinks, I need this today or it's not going to happen. And what I've realized, having lived 5 full decades, is life is a lot longer than you think. And there was a younger me who sat in the back row at major conferences watching the people on stage going, oh, I wonder if I'll ever be on stage. You know, I wonder, you know, you're all ambitious and I'm ambitious. But the joy is now at this stage in life is a lot of those people on the stage have become friends and colleagues and peers. And give yourself some time. Life happens in stages. Maybe you're just married. Maybe you're having kids for the first time. Set your ambitions according to the decade. Enjoy the moment. Life is short, but life is actually longer than you think, and you've got time.
Good. Thank you, Carey. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant.